Welcome, everyone. This is another episode of the newly named Exodus Project. I'm joined with my friend Davon Mays from Clouds of Torah. Before we get started on this video, first things first, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, give Davon and I a big thumbs up. But the topic of tonight is going to be the 10-horned beast. What is it? Who is it? Going right along with our Antichrist series we've been talking about for the last couple months. So let's get right into it. Okay. The 10-horned beast, a Clouds of Torah and Exodus project presentation. Okay. All right, Davon, if you could read that for me. Revelation's beast.
Revelation 13:1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast, and who is able to make war with him?
Okay. So we have a lot of Danielic imagery in this introduction to the beast, as Revelation calls it. So without getting too deep into it, we know from Daniel 7 that the beasts are likened to a leopard, a bear, a lion, and then, of course, the topic of the show, the 10-horned indescribable beast. We know that they represent kingdoms, right? The 4 kingdoms that subjugate Israel. The lion is Babylon. The bear with the one elevated paw is Medo-Persia. The leopard with the 4 heads is Greece, of course. And then, as most of us know, the final beast, the 10-horned beast, is Rome, right? But Revelation's author really conflates them all into this one monstrosity who is seen as the beast, right? This singular entity or leader of the government system known as, the Antichrist. That's the entire purpose of what we've been talking about here. Some think it's Satan in the flesh. Others think that this person is possessed by Satan, simply under his power. But overall, they believe it's an evil person that sets himself up in the temple of God. But the real question is, what does Daniel actually say, right? All right, Daniel's beast, go ahead.
Daniel 7:24. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them. And he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time.
Okay, so as we can see, the 10 horns of this kingdom, like we had just said, that the 4 beasts are kingdoms, right? So it says straight out in Daniel that the 10 horns are 10 kings, right? But then it says that another shall arise after them, and that's normally what they're talking about when they talk about this singular beast, this Antichrist. So who are the 10 horns? Well, we have to think about history here. Who was the figure that transformed Rome from a republic into a dictatorship, an empire? It was Julius Caesar, right? So counting Julius Caesar, we then have Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Galba, Otho, Aulus Vitellius, and Vespasian. So there we have our 10 horns, the first 10 emperors of the Roman Empire. And then following, we have Vespasian's son, Titus, who was the emperor who destroyed Jerusalem and the Second Temple. So now we see it's really all starting to come together, right? We have that one who follows the 10 kings and is a little bit different than the rest. So it's really starting to come together. And as you added this part in from your notes, the Roman empires were thought to be, or the Roman emperors were thought to be gods. This was standard practice throughout all of the ancient Near East and West. And we even see that there's images set up in the Temple of Israel. I believe that was Caligula that ordered that to be done. So, if you want to read Acts 12 there, but we're starting to get the picture painted. So
Acts 12, 21 through 22. So on a set day, Herod, arrayed in royal apparel, sat on his throne and gave an oration to them. And the people kept shouting, "The voice of a God and not of a man." So you clearly see that to them, the emperors were godlike. And a lot of them were deified after they died. I don't know how common it was for them to be deified while they were alive, but for sure, many of them were deified after they died.
Right. I mean, I remember bringing this up in a show I had just recently done. There gets to be so much mythology mixed in with all these emperors. There were even like specific days where the deification occurred, where the Roman state observes this person is in fact a demigod, right? So you had almost like a holiday in the Roman Empire when Augustus was deified. They make it common mythology that Julius Caesar's father was Venus, and so on and so forth. So it was commonplace for men of great stature, men of great power, or even someone, like a great military general, much like Julius Caesar, to be deified. And this was common. And yeah, very, very much so. It was often after they died. So that was a brilliant point.
Real quick, can you go back a slide?
To the Daniel's Beast or 10 Horns?
Yeah, one more before this one, where it talks about he will change times and laws.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's interesting. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Who changed the calendar?
I know it's called the Gregorian calendar.
Right. Wasn't that Roman based?
Yeah. Yes.
So if we have the Romans messing with the calendar, making it start at 0 based on the birth of Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Paul saying we're not under the law.
Mm-hmm.
Paul being a Roman citizen. We don't want to make this about Paul, but being a Roman citizen.
Well, the month of July is named after Julius Caesar.
Julius, Augustus. You said, oh, you're right, right?
Yep,
Octavius, right? So it's interesting that this beast changed times and laws. And it says, shall wear out the saints. Now, I'll let people, do their own thinking. But doesn't it say that Paul locked up a lot of the saints in prison?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And persecuted them, and right? Under what authority was he able to kill anybody if the Jews said that they did not have authority to kill people? But we know Herod in Acts chapter 12 was persecuting the church.
Yep.
Right? So just some things to think about concerning Rome's beasts.
Mm-hmm.
So just wanted to point that out.
Yep. Right. And he shall subdue the 3 kings. If you really read into history, right before this period, I think it was within 1 year, Rome's emperor changed 3 times before you get to Titus. So you're seeing right here, subdue 3 kings. And it was right prior to him, it was like boom, 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 3 emperor changes, right in a row, so it's so clear. It's so clear that Daniel, for anyone who made comment on this video that Daniel was talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, okay. That means you just disregard that the leopard is Greece and that the 10-horned beast is Rome. Pardon me. That interpretation of this just doesn't work. So we're seeing here 10 kings, 10 emperors of Rome before we get to the subjugation of Israel. And then one that comes after that, sacks the temple, destroys Jerusalem, does some really messed up stuff within the temple. And the way he comes to power is pretty evident with exactly what Daniel 7:24 says right here. So,
well, real quick, let's entertain it. Let's entertain that this is Antiochus Epiphanes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the book of John, I want to say chapter 10, verses 22 and 23, it talks about the story of Hanukkah.
Yep.
Now, when you look up Hanukkah, if you look in the Strong's Concordance under the definitions and things like that, it talks about the Antiochian, how does it word it? It talks about that period of time, like the Antiochian interruption.
Mm-hmm.
I forget exactly the words it uses, but it basically tells you Hanukkah was celebrated based on Antioch Epiphanes. So if they're celebrating Hanukkah after the event in John chapter 10 in the times of the New Testament, Antioch's time came and went.
Yeah, it was about 200 years prior.
Right. So to try to apply him to the last beast, when according to the New Testament, his time already had come and went, which is why they already celebrating Hanukkah in the New Testament. That really doesn't work for the final beast if they're already celebrating a holiday which defeated Antioch's time.
Exactly.
So, and of course, they probably never read the book of Maccabees to, go over these things. So just something else to point out.
Right, for sure. Yeah, and that's a good point. Is you see Jesus himself in the New Testament, you see him coming to Jerusalem for the I believe the word they use is rededication, which is really what Hanukkah means. So you see right in the New Testament Jesus celebrating Hanukkah. So this obviously is post-Antiochian.
Right.
Yeah, so good point. Real good point. Okay, so we covered the 10 horns. So, here's a good one. Titus Flavius. His name, now obviously it's Hebrew characters, but this would be Aramaic. Neron Kaiser. Nun, Resh, Vav Nun, Kuf, Samech Resh. So it says it right here. This is gematria. You add them up, and what do you get? 666. So Nero or Neron Kaiser equals 666. This was actually the given name. So for anyone who doesn't know, Vespasian and Titus, they're called that to differentiate the two. They actually have the same name. They're father and son. They're both Nero, Vespasian, Titus Flavius, I think is their full name. But they both have the exact same name. It's like, me and my dad's Stephen Brad Eisenhower Sr. and Stephen Brad Eisenhower Jr., right? So same exact concept. So both of their names add up to 666, which is this number of the beast, right? The number that everyone says will get put on your right hand and your forehead. So that's, it just goes to show, like I said, the picture that's being painted in the first century when this was written, they weren't looking ahead to some future coming monster. You know what I mean? The monster was there then and that. You know what I mean? The monster was there already.
It was on site.
He was on site. Exactly.
And for those who don't know, there are manuscripts that show 616 and not 666.
Right.
And for
If you
those
drop
that
the if
go
you
ahead.
drop the second the nun sophis on the end of Neron and just make it Nero, that's 616.
So also Solomon brought in 666 talents of gold per year. So this number is already in the Tanakh, but it's just not something that's talked about.
Right.
So just
Yeah.
it's also mentioned somewhere else too, but we don't want to go into the mark of the beast. But just to bring up what you're saying, they were not looking, thousands of years into the future. They were talking about something that was on site. Is why the preterists, which we're going to deal with, if not this show and a later show, are all over this, saying this happened. This was already going down, which is why
Right.
the whole concept of this generation shall not pass. We shall be saved from the present evil powers. Paul says this in Galatians.
Yeah, exactly.
The present evil system. The present system. He doesn't talk about the future. He's talking about now. This is going down. It's about to happen. If you're married, act like you're not married. They were ready.
Yeah. Yep.
1 Corinthians chapter 7. If you have a wife, act like you're not married. What? Okay. Yeah. We must be getting raptured next week. Okay. Right. So just to put into context, why all the rush of the words are rushed, coming soon. It is the last hour, right? There are many antichrists in the world. Like all these things are talking about a now type of situation.
Right. And just to put a little of my own, I don't like doing this obviously, but just to put a little bit of historical context, some conjecture on top of this, in these messianic periods, we see up until the end at Masada, fighting to the death. You know what I mean? These people were nationalists and they didn't want to give up their homeland. The Jews, obviously. So what could be a simple way of understanding, well, you took this mark of the beast? Surrendering, giving in, becoming a slave, becoming a collaborator. You know what I mean? Going under the Roman rule. What was the entire point of this messianic movement at the time? Was, we can't let Rome win. So what would be like I said, this is just a little of my own imposition, some history upon it. What would be the sign that you turn to the dark side, really? It's that you give in. You give in to Rome. You collaborate, become a slave, go back to Rome with them. Because we know Titus, after the destruction of Jerusalem, he marched so many slaves and we had different factions in the temple at the time. The Herodians were all in bed with Rome. So we're just seeing a lot that this was obviously written for the contemporaries, right?
Give Caesar's things unto Caesar.
Yeah, exactly.
Whose image is on the money? The emperor, right? Whose image is on our money? The president, right? Whose language is on our money? Latin.
Yeah. Yep.
What has changed?
Exactly. Now you mentioned the calendar. It's still all there. It's still all there.
When you watch the Super Bowl, what numbers are you reading?
Right. Yep. Yeah, so I don't think we can hammer this point home enough, is that these texts were written in a contemporaneous manner. For people then, like, think of all the digging people had to do to understand stuff like this. Whereas then that would have been like secret messages. You know what I mean? Like, I write you a note with some context only you and I would know. You know what I mean? That would have been commonplace back then. These people would have known this stuff. It's contemporaneous. It's clear that it's contemporaneous. But what happens over the years is the stuff doesn't come to fruition the way the church expects it to, and it gets tampered with. And this is why you have 50,000 discrepancies between the texts. And
the goalpost gets moved. The second coming, it's spiritual. Right. It's not the kingdom doesn't come with observation. it just keeps moving and moving and moving further and further away from the actual prophecies.
Exactly. Okay, so Revelation 7 heads, if you want to talk about, read that for me there, Davon.
Revelation 17, 9 through 11. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, one is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition.
There's that perdition again. But yeah, like we said, it's pretty common that there's kind of like 2 datings on Revelation. Some people say it's either like 65, or the more consensus view is turn of the 2nd century.
Yeah. 95, early 2nd century. Yeah.
Yeah. 95 to 110 or about.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get on that in our next show, why the late dating is much more probable. But regardless, we see right here that these 7 heads on that beast, it's identified. There's 7 mountains. So just by happenstance.
Well, what's interesting is it says on whom the woman sits. Earlier we read about a dragon and a beast and an antichrist, but now we have a woman,
which is the Whore of Babylon.
Right? The Whore of Babylon. Well, the text that they're talking about, when you actually read them, and you go back and read Isaiah and Ezekiel and Zechariah and Daniel, we see that Babylon has already fallen. Right. So to pull Babylon into this situation and make her the kingdom and not talk about Rome. Everything is, we're going to talk about everything but Rome, right? We're going to use the imagery, the 7 mountains, where we're going to get into that, but to turn it into a Babylonian system when Babylon has already been fallen and destroyed by one of the prior beasts, which you brought up, Medo-Persia. Mm-hmm. Babylon has already been conquered.
Yep.
Read Jeremiah. So how is the woman represented by Babylon when Babylon is already destroyed?
I'll play devil's advocate on this for a minute, because for anyone who didn't know, I actually did a pretty extensive seminar on the book of Revelation. So from a more, New Age Christian eschatological view, definitely Protestant, evangelical, etc., the Whore of Babylon represents the Catholic Church. And the reason Babylon is used is because Babylon is symbology for idolatry. So while there are people that say, okay, it literally means this is Babylon, that there was some pull away here, just to be fair to every viewpoint, right? Because if we can't hit every viewpoint, then we shouldn't even be doing this. You know what I mean? The Whore of Babylon is supposed to be this like idolatrous figure that is meshed in with the kingdom itself, and that. So what it's saying is that this is all meshed in together with idolatry and haughtiness and evil. It's all under Satan's power. So far right Christianity, evangelical Protestant, they just dump this all on the Catholic Church. Because they do understand the 10 kings. They do understand the 7 hills, but they're still left with that they believe in Christianity. So it comes down to restoration theology and what's the word I'm looking for here? Progressive revelation. so on and so forth, that the devil has his fingers in the Catholic Church and moved the church away from the true faith, right? And now they're restored back. So all these little prophecies are about the Catholic Church, is what they want to propose. But if that's the case, then why do you why do you accept so much of their practice? You know, there's that Protestantism, evangelicalism, so on and so forth, adheres so much to sola scriptura and all this, but yet you accept the Gregorian calendar, you accept the Catholic holidays, you accept the Catholic canon, right?
Traditions, everything.
Everything.
And this is why I posed it in the question form, saying, why is Babylon? You know, I'm not giving a verdict here. I'm just saying why.
I agree.
Because you pretty much hit it on the head, because it could represent so many things. But what's interesting, it says 7 mountains. Mm-hmm. How many churches was mentioned in the early Revelation? Right to the, was it 7 churches?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're writing the 7 churches, and there's 7 mountains on which the woman sits.
Those were all in Turkey, though.
Right. It's just interesting that they're trying to.
I get it.
When you go into the numerologies and all these things, and you start putting some pieces together, you kind of see. So if these 7 mountains on which the woman sits they're being talked about in the way of they're being disciplined for the most part, saying, you know, I have some things against you, right?
Right.
They're not they're not so kosher, right? They're like, because the reason why I'm bringing this up, because you said they're taking everything and they're mixing it together.
Mm-hmm.
Those 7 churches are being chastised because they're mixing in different doctrines of Balaam and Jezebel and all these different things. So I'm just trying to get people to think about what's really going on. Why is there so much division in these churches if the message is so clear in the Gospels? If Paul and the Gospels are so well put together, why is Paul constantly fighting with everybody else?
Right.
These are things you have to think about, and why a lot of people thought Paul was a heretic, and why a lot of people thought the Trinitarians were heretics, and then the Trinitarians called everybody else heretics.
Mm-hmm.
All this whole Babylon system that they're trying to talk about is just a giant mess. And we're going to get into why people thought the church was actually the beast, like you talked about.
Yep. So Rome's 7 hills.
The 7 hills of Rome, group of hills on or about which the ancient city of Rome was built. The original city of Romulus was built upon Palatine Hill, Latin, Mons Palatinus. The other hills are the Capitoline, Quirinal, Viminal, Esquiline, Callian, and Aventine, known respectively in Latin as the Mons Capitolinos, Mons Quirinalis, Mons Viminalis, Mons Esquilinus, Mons Callius, and Mons Aventinus. Say that fast, right?
Yeah, right.
Citation is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, Britannica.com, place 7 Hills of Rome. So this is not my opinion. This is from the Britannica. So you can go look this up yourself. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the Britannica. So if the 7 Hills of Rome are the hills on which the woman sits, what does that tell you? Now we're back to Rome and their popes.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem. That's a huge problem.
Yep.
So just something to think about as far as where the Antichrist would be coming from.
Right. And this, we'll get into Revelation a little bit more, but like I said, I just want to hammer home that point that this was contemporaneous. This was contemporaneous writings. And I've actually was in contact with James Tabor. I want to get him on and talk about this a little bit too. As Christianity was going more to Rome, as it was making its exodus, let's say, from Jerusalem and getting more and more Athens and more Rome, as the Gentilic faiths were really imposing all their wills upon to Christianity. You have the Pauline doctrines and so on and so forth. Obviously, those Ebionite Christians weren't about it. You know what I mean? They weren't okay with this stuff.
No.
Right? So
James wasn't okay with it.
James definitely wasn't okay with it. So it's just going to show that even at the time that this stuff was written, there's some dissension going on. If we know that these are meant for temporary sources, contemporaneous audiences, people that are knowing exactly what you're talking about, you have a mass migration due to the destruction of the temple and so on to Rome of slaves, Jewish slaves, whether they were Christians, Ebionites, or Jews, whatever. You're having this mass migration into Rome, and now you're seeing all these books coming up at this same time that none of it agrees. You have nullifying the Torah, not nullifying the Torah. Believe in Jesus, but he was just a man. Nope, believe in Jesus, he was God. You just have all this headbutting, even between a religion that everyone nowadays seems to believe is so monolithic.
Right.
So, that's getting off topic a little bit, but it's just giving some historical context to the text that this stuff wasn't really so cut and dry as everyone in 21st century modernity thinks. There was so much symbology here, whether it was used correctly or incorrectly, that they thought the time was now, right? So they thought it was all going down at the time they were writing this stuff. So
even their rebels, for instance, Jesus Barabbas.
Yep.
Matthew 27, who was in jail with Jesus. So a lot of people don't know that because most manuscripts, not most manuscripts, but a lot of translations leave out Jesus Barabbas. They just call him Barabbas.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a rebel. You got Theudas in Acts chapter 5. You got Judas of Galilee.
Yep.
These were rebels. So when Jesus comes on the scene, he's more of a nice type of Messiah, a nice leader, which is more, he's somebody that, according to the text, Pilate doesn't find any problem with him calling himself a king since his kingdom is not of this world. Pilate's like, I don't see nothing. He's not doing nothing against Rome. He's not a threat. Well, right. The real Messiah is a threat because he's going to get rid of all these wicked systems. So the fact that Jesus is not looked upon as a threat in the text of the Gospels by the Romans shows you he wasn't doing his job.
Right.
Herod just wants to see some miracles. Now, It's interesting that Herod didn't want to kill him when his grandfather, the previous Herod, was looking to kill him. So if there was this huge deal that Herod was killing all these babies and all these things was happening, when it got to his grandson, I'm sure he heard the story if these things would have happened when he actually was face to face with this so-called Messiah that my grandfather wanted to kill.
Right.
All he was interested in was seeing some miracles, and then he just give him back to the governor. We don't really care. We're going to dress him up and give him back to Pilate. Doesn't sound too convincing that he was a threat to the actual Herod who wanted to kill him in the first place.
Right.
Because why did Herod want to kill him? He obviously thought he was going to lose his power to this baby who would grow up to be the Messiah. So why wouldn't the real Herod at the time say, we got to get rid of this guy according to the prophecy? My grandfather was looking for him, failed to find him. We got to get rid of him.
Right.
So
here's a quick point to provoke some thought. Who is the only disciple that's really made out to be the bad guy?
Judas,
right? And what, they give him the last name Iscariot, man of the place. Well, that's not a real name. So a lot of people, look at that Sicarii. The Sicarii were the rebels. They were the ones at Masada. right? And you even see that in Jesus's inner circle there were zealots. It says it right out. I think that was that Simon the Zealot? Or
Zealot.
So you're seeing that there's these very nationalist, rebellious members among Jesus's group. They're the ones that get made the bad guy, right? Whereas Jesus, the one who's all buddy-buddy with Rome, he's not going against.
Give Caesar's things unto Caesar. He who lives by the sword will die by the sword. Put your sword down, Peter.
Right. So, like I said, that's just a little thing to provoke some thought, is that they didn't do a very good job of covering their tracks, is the way I should put it. Because you're leaving the names in there. If you're showing me right out that one of the disciples was a Sicarii, he's the one that hangs himself because he betrayed Jesus, right? He's the bad guy. He was the one who betrayed the good guy, you know? So it's all this pro-Roman rhetoric, so much pro-Roman rhetoric, so much so that the people who are fighting on behalf of Jerusalem are made out to be the villains. So. Okay, so who did the Jews view as the beast?
Romans 13:6. Because of this, you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers attending continually to this very thing. Luke 2:1-2. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. Acts 5:37. After this man rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of the taxing and drew away many people after him. He also perished, and all who obeyed him were dispersed.
There's one of those messianic figures again.
So the paying of the taxes. Are you paying the taxes to Rome? Isn't that the question that they asked Jesus? Should we be paying taxes to Caesar, right? He said, yeah. His face is on the coinage, right? And if in the days of the taxing in Luke chapter 2, this shows you that these zealots or these rebellious people go all the way back to the time of the taxing. So when Jesus was a baby, Judas of Galilee was already trying to get the Romans up out of there.
Yep.
So the fact that Jesus of Galilee has turned into movies and stuff, the nice Messiah, Judas of Galilee was a whole nother dude.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And he perished, and all who obeyed him was dispersed. Sound familiar? So the Jews looked at people who were tax collectors in what type of light? Because Romans 13 tells you to obey the superior authorities according to Paul. Well, who was this authority at this time?
Right.
Here you have Paul, a Roman citizen, writing to the Jews and whoever else to listen to Rome. But Jesus says, listen to the scribes and the Pharisees. That doesn't sound like, something that Jesus taught. Or does it when he said pay unto Caesar things Caesar, right? So we see a dual-edged sword. On one hand, listen to the scribes and the Pharisees. On the other hand, listen to the Caesars. Give Caesars their things. Well, if Caesar's the dominating force, you are already compelled to pay the taxes, or there's going to be a consequence. Paul's position on this is really they're God's messenger. God put them in place, as if the Romans. I'm sure the church ran with Romans. I'm sure the church ran with this, right?
Definitely.
The Romans are basically saying, look, God gave us this power, so the Inquisitions are justified.
Yeah.
Right? Open your Bible. We have our own book in the Bible. Romans. Amalek. We might as well have a book of Amalek, right? You might as well.
I actually heard a Christian friend of mine one time outright say, if you have a question really about anything, about theology or what we're supposed to be, read Romans.
Read Romans. And I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Romans is kind of like the Constitution for the New Testament.
Yeah, that's pretty much. Yeah, that's Paul's Constitution, pretty much. Yep.
Right. So the beast to the Jews was really the Romans, because they were in their land. They were taxing them. They were crucifying people. You know, they were messing with the temple. There was so many problems with the Romans in the land. They had been dealing with them for a long time. So, you know,
right.
And
they knew Daniel 7. The Jews knew Daniel 7, so
right.
they knew what that beast after Greece was.
Right.
You know,
they
knew
were
that.
counting those kings. They knew
Yeah,
what all those kings meant.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that the beast is turned into a Babylonian system when it's really a Roman theology based system in their days. Now, if you lived in the time of Daniel, you wouldn't be thinking about the Romans. But if you lived in the time of the Romans and you're reading Daniel, you could be like, man, this is it. We're here.
Yeah.
You know, so the Roman theology and all the Greek gods and all the stuff that the pantheons and all these things that were in their world. You have Jupiter on site. You have Jupiter has his own temple. If you was to ask the Romans at that time, who's the son of God? They're going to say Hercules.
Yep.
Right? They're not going to say Jesus. So the fact that Jesus is introduced to them as the Son of God is already something that's already on their minds, right. On their mind as far as how they view their gods.
Mm-hmm.
Virgin births all over.
What else might they have said? Caesar, right?
Caesar, right? Herod, the voice of a god,
mm-hmm.
Right? So their mindset was so much open to all this, because Paul is very Greek in his thinking. His explanations of things is very Greek.
Oh, for sure.
And people don't really realize where Paul is drawing his theology from, because he said it doesn't come from any man. He says it's coming from a revelation from Jesus. Well, that means if that's true, Jesus was very Greek in his explanations to Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I know nobody's really going to understand that, but read what he says himself in Galatians.
Yep.
He says he doesn't get. So that means bragging about coming up under Gamaliel for what? You don't even teach what Gamaliel taught. So why are you trying to get credentials for being his student where you're not teaching Torah, you teaching Greek philosophy in the name of Jesus?
Right. Right. And we might have talked about this before, but just the entire explanation of what the character of Jesus is in the first chapter of John is directly from Philo's writings. The divine logos. I mean, it's really a plagiarism of Philo. And the book of John, as we said before, you're disconnecting so far from the original source. You are now so steeped in Greek, right? So read these sources next to one another. If you hear us say that this is a plagiarism or this is being drawn off of different sources, look up those sources. Go to Professor Google, find the Philo Logos literature and read it next to John 1. I'm not making this stuff up. Like Davon always says, I didn't write it. You know what I mean? Yeah, so just check it out. Don't take our word for it. So, but like we said last time, all this, like the St. John the Divine, John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, the book of John, all written 95, turn of the century. And now is when you're having all this very anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish rhetoric coming up, right? Starting to attribute things in the opposite direction, pro-Roman, Rome good, Israel bad, really.
Pretty much.
Okay. And then in conclusion, it not coming up for you?
Not showing up, no. I see it in the small tabs on the left, but it's not on the big screen.
I'm going to try it again.
Here we go. Matthew 17, 11 through 13. Jesus answered and said to them, indeed, Elijah is coming first and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has come already, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Likewise, the Son of Man is about to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. So the question is, if Elijah came to restore all things, what was the point in that if the Antichrist and the beast is going to come and kill everyone for not taking the mark? What kind of restoration is that?
Right. Right.
Doesn't make any sense.
And then those ones who do take the mark are damned to eternal hell anyway. So where's the restoration in that if Elijah's going to be coming?
Well, the problem, he says Elijah has already come, though.
Right. And then what's wild is later on in Revelation, we won't get too deep into this point, but you know, the two witnesses that it talks about throughout Revelation, right before getting close to the end of the book,
Mm-hmm.
you know, everyone believes that that is John the Baptist and Elijah. that's a very
Moses
strong
and
held
Elijah.
opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
I've heard Moses and Elijah or John the Baptist and Elijah. If they've already come, and John denies this, of course, in John chapter 1, going back to John denies that he's Elijah. He denies he's a prophet. You know, so that would make Jesus a liar, right? If he's saying that John was Elijah and John said, no, I'm not. I've even heard people say John didn't know he was Elijah.
And if he was, why do they both have to come back?
And if he was, how come he didn't turn the hearts of the children to the fathers, which is what Elijah was supposed to do?
Right.
And according to Jewish tradition, Elijah's supposed to bring in the Messiah.
Yep.
Well, the Christians will say John the Baptist brought in Jesus. Well, Jesus said he was going to restore all things, though. Acts chapter 1, they says, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? If John already came and did that, why are they asking Jesus to do it?
Mm-hmm.
See, it doesn't make any sense when you put the Gospels are not cohesive. They actually work against each other.
Oh, yeah.
If somebody tells you they're cohesive, it sounds good, but when you actually read them, they're like, well, this can't happen if this happened. It doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, in conclusion, what kind of restoration did Elijah bring or John bring if the Antichrist is going to come after all this and just divide everybody all over again?
Right. Right. Yeah. So, like it says, conclusion. What were the main points here? You know, Revelation puts all the beasts into this one figure, the Antichrist. Right. That disagrees with Daniel. Daniel says outright that the beast with 10 horns, the 10 horns are 10 kings, and the beast itself is the kingdom, Rome. We outlined what those 10 horns are, and that the next king is Titus, the one that destroys the temple, right? Titus's name, Gematria, adds up to 666. So right there we have a little bit of context as to what Revelation was actually talking about. So, yeah, guys, it's very clear that in Revelation, they were pulling off of Daniel's symbology, but they were just totally warping it into something else. Whether the author of John was intending it to be Titus or the author of John was intending a future character, we don't believe that he was intending a future character based upon the 666 rhetoric we showed you. But regardless, Daniel doesn't say that. Daniel's intention isn't to show you that this 10-horned beast is the devil or this son of the devil coming in the devil's power. You know, Daniel's saying these are 4 kingdoms, and the final one is going to be so horrible. There's going to be 10 kings. One comes later, we get subjugated, we're exiled, etc. You know? So you just got to think, guys. What I really need to do is I need to I think I might do it. Actually put a link to the slides in the description of this video, and then everyone can actually have the slides If they want to, they can download them, write on them, print them out, whatever. And then you have the information. You have all this right at your fingertips. Then you can actually work with the video right next to it. So,
not a bad idea. Nero. There's a tradition that Paul was killed by Nero.
mm-hmm.
Now, if Nero was one of the beasts, killed Paul, right? Which is a trip, because if Nero was the beast and he killed Paul, well, after Nero, the system never fell apart, right? And when it says there are many antichrists, so Nero, according to some, if Nero's the antichrist, according to Jesus, Judas was the son of perdition. According to John, there are many antichrists. According to Paul, the antichrist had to be somebody who sat in the temple, which would have been Titus. So y'all see all these different doctrines just don't work. Mm-hmm. So that would mean Paul was killed by the antichrist that he didn't even know about. He thought it was somebody who was supposed to sit in the temple. So a different antichrist killed Paul, other than the one he talked about in Thessalonians.
Mm-hmm.
So research it yourself. Look it up yourself.
And the most important thing is the source material. Daniel doesn't believe it's a man at all. The beast is representative of a kingdom. The horn is representative of a man that subjugates the Jewish people. It has nothing to do with some eternal torment and damnation, right? I mean, we move forward into Daniel 9, and you and I have spoken about potentially doing a series of shows on this also. You move into Daniel 9, which is only 2 chapters after 7, obviously, so not too long after, and it gives you a laid out timeline of temple destruction to temple destruction. So what is the whole point behind Daniel? Is he really talking about something that's going to happen 6,000 years later, 5,000 years later? You know what I mean? Or is he talking about something that's rather timely for the Jews within the next few generations after the prophecy was given, right? The next 400 years,
And in Daniel chapter 3, when it talks about, Nebuchadnezzar built that idol, or that giant statue, we already know idolatry is something that Israel and in the 7 laws of Noah is forbidden. So for people to be so caught up on the mark of the beast, when if you don't worship the beast and its number and all this stuff, you're going to be killed. Well, we already know that. If you have to worship something in order to make money, if I got to worship an idol in order to make money, or however it's spun on your version of the mark of the beast, Daniel already told us about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were like, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to worship your God. So do what you got to do." You know what I'm saying? So to make it seem like, oh, this mark of the beast is going to be this new thing. No, that's not a new thing. Idolatry is attached to people's lives in one way or another. Yes, today, but now I don't have to worship an idol to go to work or make money.
Right.
So if it comes to that point, of course I'm not going to say nobody's going to do it, but we already know not to do that. And it's not tied to believing in Jesus. That's already a commandment to not, commit idolatry. So, it's not nothing new that they're bringing to the table with that teaching.
For sure. But yeah, Davon, I think that just about covers it.
Yep.
But yeah, everybody, like we said, do a little bit of your own research. Look into the historical contexts. Don't just take our words for it. And don't just take these. I don't want to be too divisive here. Don't just take the doctrines that you're hearing in church as, set in stone, right? If there's 50,000 different denominations, obviously there's 50,000 different doctrines. You know what I mean? So this stuff is ever changing amidst Christianity. Try to do a little bit of research historically and get back to the source of your own texts, really. But in conclusion, everyone, thanks for watching. Davon, Clouds of Torah. I have some links to a few of his books in the description of the videos. Check out his YouTube channel. Also, just Clouds of Torah. He's got a lot of content on there, some very similar to what we're talking about right now, even. And he also has some that are very similar to some past shows we did. For example, like the Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. Check those out. Those will give some good context onto what we're talking about here. But until next time, guys, Davon, thank you. I appreciate you. And
thank you.
See you next time, guys.